Hey, we moved to a different room about halfway through this recording because I originally recorded it, and then about the first half didn't have volume. So at about 23 minutes, it jumps to a different room, and probably the sound quality had changed because I used a different microphone. But anyhow, picking up where we left off in class. Remember, we talked about the Kansas Nebraska Act, and that allows for something called popular sovereignty, where Kansas, the citizens of Kansas, decide if they want to be a slave state or a free state. And so, a big thing within the state, well, it's a territory right now, is there's two groups. There's the Free Soilers and there's the Border Ruffians. Now, the Free Soilers are people that are voting for, a free Kansas, but there's some that live in Kansas that are citizens, and there's others that are going to move to Kansas, establish residency, and vote in that election. That is completely legal. You can do that. There's also the pro-slavery faction that want Kansas to become a slave state. Among those are a group of people called Border Ruffians. And those are people from Missouri. Remember, the other day we talked about Missouri is hanging out up there, and to the west, north, and the east, they are surrounded by free states or territories. And they want, over here to the west is Kansas, they want that to become a slave state. So the Border Ruffians are people that are from Missouri that are going to cross the border. They're going to vote in this election, and then they will return home. So they are illegally voting in an election where they do not have residency. That's illegal. You can't do that. All right. So there are enough Border Ruffians, though, to sway this election. So enough people cross from Missouri, I think about 5,000, which is crazy. But enough cross the border from Missouri into Kansas, and they're going to vote in this election, and then they will return home. So Kansas has voted to become a slave state. Well, there's a big outcry from the Free Soilers. Hey, this is a stolen election. Lots of people did this. We kind of have proof, sort of thing. Well, the pro-slavery folks are going to establish a pro-slavery government in Lecompton, Kansas. Now, on that, you do not have to remember that Lecompton is the pro-slavery government and Lawrence is the free soil government. I get them mixed up. There's no way I would ask somebody else to keep those straight on a test. But if you remember they have a free soil government and a pro-slavery government, you're good. But the pro-slavery people are going to establish a government in Lecompton, and about, I think it's like 10 or 20 miles from there, the free soil people are going to establish a free soil government in Lawrence, Kansas. So you've got two territorial governments that are trying to rule the territory within the same territory, and one is pro-slavery and one is free soil. Well, that can't go on, and this is very heated. And so a little while later, the pro-slavery folks, or some of them at least, of Kansas are going to launch an attack, complete with artillery, on the town of Lawrence. So you have an all-out, military engagement on the town of Lawrence. Now, none of, I thought they did kill someone. None of the free soil people get killed, but they're gonna try to take off and seek shelter. But the pro-slavery people do burn down the town. They destroy the town of Lawrence, and one of the pro-slavery people actually gets killed. He was going into the hotel there in Lawrence, and they were catching it on fire, and a portion of the hotel collapsed on this guy and killed him. So, but anyway, so the pro-slavery people attacked the community of Lawrence. And so things are getting super wild out in Kansas. Hang on to them for a while. We're going to jump to the United States Congress. So in Congress, there is heavy and really intense debate over the issue of Kansas. And during one of these debates, a senator from Massachusetts, Charles Sumner, is going to absolutely go after hardcore another senator named Andrew Butler. Andrew Butler is pro-slavery. Andrew Butler is from South Carolina. And Charles Sumner just lit into him verbally. And a couple of days later, a guy from the House of Representatives, a guy named Preston Brooks, also from South Carolina and Andrew Butler's cousin, is going to leave the House of Representatives, and he will wind up on the Senate floor. And he walks over to Charles Sumner's desk, and while Charles Sumner is seated at his desk, doesn't give him a chance to get up, Preston Brooks starts beating on him. So the guy is sitting at his desk, and it's hard to jump up out of a desk to defend yourself. Preston Brooks starts weighing into him and just beating him with his cane. And he broke his cane. Preston Brooks actually beat him so much with the cane, he broke his cane and then started kind of stabbing him a little, not running him through all the way, but kind of poking him pretty good with the cane. And so things are getting crazy in Congress. Things are heating up. Couple of things. Charles Sumner and Preston Brooks are going to be reelected to Congress. Charles Sumner is definitely the victim here. He is going to return home, and he won't return to the Senate for 3 years. It takes dude 3 years to recover from that insane beating that he got. But both of these guys are going to be reelected. Preston Brooks will be reelected from his constituents in his district down in South Carolina. He's censured by the Congress, but it's a slap on the wrist, and he's reelected. Also, though, Preston Brooks broke his cane, and so he will be given gifts of hundreds of replacement canes from all over the South, because he broke his cane, and so he's out of cane. And so Southerners, pro-slavery people, are going to send him gifts of replacement canes. Some of them are supposedly even inscribed, "Hit him again." So things are getting pretty violent within Congress. Preston Brooks is even, he cowardly beat this man at his desk, didn't give the guy a chance to stand up and defend himself. And so Preston Brooks is challenged to a duel by another congressman. This other congressman, I forgot his name off the top of my head, but he supposedly was a really good shot. And so Preston Brooks was worried that he was going to get lit up by this other congressman and get shot. And so Brooks comes up with all kinds of excuses on why he can't go and do this duel and stuff like that. And he is just, super chickening out because he is now probably going to get super harmed or dead. So, but anyway, so things are insanely heated in Congress. People are openly threatening to kill each other and stuff. So back to Kansas for just a second. Now, in response to the sacking of Lawrence, Kansas, a abolitionist, remember the abolitionists are the people that, hey, we need to end slavery right now, damn the consequences. An abolitionist named John Brown out in Kansas. Now, John Brown is a serious figure. Around this time, before he does this, what he's about to do, he stands up in his church and raises his hand and pledges in front of the entire congregation to give his life in order to try to end slavery. So dude pledges to give his life in the fight to end slavery. Well, after the sacking of Lawrence, Kansas, John Brown is going to take several of his sons and several other anti-slavery abolitionist folks, and they are going to take artillery broadswords. Now, artillery broadsword is about this size. I don't know if you can quite see it holding up my hands right, but it's about the size of a machete. And it's got a really, really thick blade, and it's intended to be able to cleave through bone. So you can go through a femur with this, apparently. And Brown and several of his sons and a couple of friends are going to go to a pro-slavery community called Pottawatomie Creek. And they're going to pull, in the middle of the night, pull several pro-slavery men from their households, take them out in the woods, and hack them to death. So Brown's going to kill, along with his sons and some other folks, kill several pro-slavery people. It doesn't solve the problem. In response to Brown doing this, now you're going to have pro-slavery people raiding, and then, the free soil people are going to raid back, and so it's back and forth, back and forth. Ultimately, President Franklin Pierce is going to have to send troops out to Kansas to try to squish things, or at least get them under control. Scribbly down kind of thing. Kansas has met population requirements for statehood, and they have drafted a constitution. Now, the Constitution is a pro-slavery constitution from an illegal election, but they have drafted a constitution, and I believe they've sent that off to Congress. But Kansas is not going to get statehood just yet. It's not until partway through the Civil War, I think even towards the end of the Civil War, that Kansas actually gets statehood because of all this craziness. I don't want to call it an internal civil war. I will call other things an internal civil war, but Kansas, because of all of this violence and infighting and stuff like that, is not going to be granted statehood. Congress is going to hold off on that because of all of this kind of craziness out there. So, whoops, I kind of drug that, and boop, there we go. Now, this slide, I'm gonna introduce Dred Scott, and then we'll pick up on the next lecture. I'm gonna try to smush them together, but they may be in part 1, part 2, who knows? It just depends on if I can figure it out or not. So we're going to introduce this, and then we'll switch in the middle of the story to the next lecture video. So this case, Scott versus Sanford, this has been called, and scribbly down, this has been called the worst Supreme Court decision ever to come out of the United States Supreme Court. We'll get into why later on in the second part of this video, but worst Supreme Court case decision ever. Starts with an enslaved man named Dred Scott. Interesting, Dred Scott was enslaved here in Huntsville. And he was enslaved by a man named Peter Blow, Blow. And Peter Blow lived here in Huntsville, owned an enslaved man named Dred Scott, and for some reason was not jiving with Huntsville, and so took Dred Scott to the state of Missouri. Slave state, that's okay. Legal, anyway. So took Dred Scott to the slave state of Missouri. And while he was in Missouri, he sold Mr. Scott to an army surgeon. And you don't have to remember the surgeon's name, but this was Dr. Emerson. And now, if you're in the military says you go somewhere, you go somewhere. You don't have a choice. And so the military ordered Dr. Emerson at one point to go to Illinois. Illinois is a free state. Slavery is not legal there. And then later, the military, United States Army, ordered Dr. Emerson to go into some free territories. Slavery is illegal in the territories. According to the Northwest Ordinance that applies to almost everything right now, all of the territories, slavery is illegal according to Northwest Ordinance, slavery is illegal in all of the territories. Now, the other day we introduced the Compromise of 1850. That mixes things up. It says slavery is legal in the territories of Utah and New Mexico. Emerson's not going there. But he does take him into free territories where slavery is illegal. And then later, Emerson brings Dred Scott back to Missouri. And while Dred Scott is in Missouri, actually, just a second, back up a little bit. While Scott was up in those free territories, he met another enslaved woman named Harriet, and he and Harriet had a couple of kids. Somehow, probably just purchase, but Dr. Emerson becomes the owner of Harriet as well. And so the Emerson and the Scott family returned to Missouri. Now, while they're in Missouri, Dr. Emerson dies, and Dr. Emerson's wife becomes the owner of the Scott family. Now, while they're in Missouri, though, and now Dr. Emerson's wife is the owner of Dred Scott and family, Scott sues for his freedom. And he argues this based on that he was taken to free territories and he was taken to a free state. And so that neutralized, his enslavement, and so he should be free at that point. So right there, we're going to cut and go to the second video and pick up there. Cool.